Good morning. All right, we're looking at Gotu Kola today. And we're going to be working with it in tea form. So this is going to be our plant exploration today is Gotu Kola. And then over the next 2 weeks, as we've been doing recently, over the next 2 weeks, we'll start working with Gotu Kola in formulation. This, sort of similar to the to elderflower that we were just looking at in the last 3 weeks, is a plant that has really profound effects, both when taken internally and also when applied topically. So over the next couple of weeks, we will look at it in both ways and explore that. But today we're doing our deep dive. Today we're just going to be looking at the plant itself. And this is a plant that we'll be using as a tea. We'll talk about other forms of it because this is a plant. Gotu Kola today. Because I wrote it up there. This is a plant that lends itself abundantly to medicine making. A wide range of medicine making techniques can be applied to Gotu Kola. So it's a really, really fabulous plant for that. It is also, if you have a garden, it is a plant that loves to show up in your garden. It really, really loves to show up in your garden. And I think it's one of the most beneficial plants to have in the garden. So I didn't plant my Gotu Kola. It popped up in a pot of other plants, but it has become established in my garden in areas that get a large amount of water. It's a water-loving plant. So I'll talk about growing it because after you learn about it, you're totally going to want to grow it. And it propagates very readily. This is Gotu Kola that I pulled out of one of my plants, and you can see that it forms roots very, very readily. So this can be propagated, just popped into a pot, and we have numerous little Gotu Kola plants. So it is a plant that propagates very easily, and it's an incredibly valuable plant. So let's look at the tea. I made an infusion of the tea. This is going to be pretty strong tasting. Let me know if any of y'all have Gotu Kola at home, if you're going to be tasting along with us. And if not, then you can just watch this and then go back. Find some Gotu Kola, make some tea or tincture, or however you're going to be using it, and then go through this process yourself, because this is really the way to introduce yourself to plants. So Gotu Kola, we have a hot infusion using hot water. We infused the herb, so it was in water steeping. We didn't bring it to a boil. We didn't simmer it. We didn't do what's called decoction. This is just a plant we're going to make as an infusion. That's standard tea making practice. This has been steeping for about 15 minutes. And I used a pretty good amount. It was about half of an ounce in about 3 cups of water. So if you smell it first, you also want to kind of just introduce yourself to a plant by breathing it in. See what it smells like and just see those olfactory memories are complex and profound. We have really good sense of smell. Not as good as, say, a dog or something, but it's a pretty good sense of smell. And so, and those olfactory memories, when we breathe something in, when we breathe in aromatic compounds, they go directly to that olfactory bulb embedded in our sinus cavity, and that information goes directly to the brain. And so we have those aromatic memories, that aromatic information is able to, it doesn't have to go through all of this processing by the body to finally get to the nervous system to finally get to the brain, it is immediately taken up and boom, goes right into the brain. So we have really rapid and profound effects to smelling things. Hi, folks. We have a new tea for the next couple of weeks. So we have Gotu Kola. These are plant today, and I'll give you just a little bit of the tea to try, and then if you want more, you're certainly welcome to have as much as you like, but that way you don't feel like you have to drink a whole cup of tea, because it's not the completely yummiest tea I've ever made. But what we're doing first, before we taste it, is we're just smelling it and asking ourselves, what does the smell remind you of? Talking about how those smell memories kind of get into our brain and stay there. So is there something that the smell reminds you of? It also tells us a lot. This is what's called organoleptic testing. This is using our organs of sense to test for the presence of stuff, right? We can tell a lot about what something smells like. What can you tell about this one? Does it smell like anything, any foods that you can think of?
It's like, I smell it and I'm like, oh, that's this. And then is that like the inside of a pumpkin, the inside of celery? It's like the inside of something.
It's the inside of something. Yeah, because there's a little bit of like a mustiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It smells like a tea I've had.
You've had, it's a familiarity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a plant in the Apiaceae family. The Apiaceae family used to be called the Umbelliferaceae family. And this is the family that includes parsley and celery and carrots. Yeah. Parsley, celery, and carrots. So those are things that a lot of times when you think of that and have that smell, that is sometimes the association, because we don't often think of parsley, carrots, and celery. Good morning. When we're drinking teas. But there are many medicinal plants in this family, and quite often the Apiaceae family plants will give that celery, carrot, parsley kind of flavor and smell. So that's one of the smells but it also has that just musty, a little bit sweet. There's a little bit of a sweetness to it.
Yeah. You say by smelling it, you said organ lack.
Oh, but yeah, let me write that down. It's a really good word. This is one of the most important ways that we learn in this class. It's one of the most important ways that we learn as humans. Organoleptic testing is what we're using. So we're using our organs of sense. We just smelled it, and we can smell things in there, even if we don't know what it is. We're bringing in that information, and that makes us able to, the next time we smell Gotu Kola, we can say, oh yeah, this smells like Gotu Kola. Or if someone makes us tea and says, this is Gotu Kola tea, and we smell it, we can go, nah, I've had Gotu Kola before. That doesn't smell like Gotu Kola, right? It's information that we've taken in. And so we know a lot about this plant. So then when we taste it, we can also know there are small aromatic particles that can come up and be taken up by our sensory organs. There's also larger molecules that are there that we can smell, but they're not necessarily aromatic. And then there's also a whole bunch of complex chemistry in there that we cannot smell. And it's not going to show up until we taste it. Tasting is another part of the organoleptic sensing, is we're going to taste it and see what our mouth takes in. We have all of these taste receptors on our tongue. We also have tissues in our mouth that are very, very sensitive and very reactive. The mouth takes in information as we're eating food, as we're drinking teas, as we're taking stuff into our body. And it is it's one of the last ways that our body can say, nope, I don't want this in me, by spitting it out, right? Before we swallow it, we have all of this information that's coming into our body saying, do I actually want to swallow this? Is a good thing to take into my body, or do I want to not, right? So we have a lot of sensory awareness in our mouth, which serves us well. So if we take a sip of the tea, we're going to pay attention to the taste, but we're also going to feel how it makes the tissues of our mouth feel. And I made this one pretty strong because I wanted you to taste it. And again, it's not the yummiest plant, but it's not horrible tasting. What do you think about the taste of this plant?
Definitely has a bitter taste.
Definitely bitter, yeah. So it is bitter. Yeah.
It tastes a little starchy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a little bit of a sweet flavor when we think about plant sweetness and not like sugar sweetness, right? The term sweetness has been kind of tweaked by what we've done to our food. When we taste plants, that is that kind of starchy flavor. Yeah, so bitter, starchy.
Did you do the root or is it?
This is leaf.
Just the leaf.
This is the leaf. It's not the fresh leaf, but that's what the fresh leaf looks like. Yeah. It also, to me, tastes kind of soapy, right? There's just that.
Oh, that little bit of satin.
Yeah, that kind of Yeah. That's the technical way that we describe that is yeah. So that bitterness definitely is there. There's also a change in the feel of your mouth, how the tissues of your mouth feel, right? They're generally coated with a layer of mucus that protects them, and that mucus is good. We want that there. But in my mouth, that feeling of that slime and the mucus has been disrupted. It no longer feels slimy the way that it used to, right? So it has a little bit of a change. How does the inside of your mouth feel with the presence of the tea?
Sometimes when you drink tea, it's hard to tell if it's the hot water that causes that or if it's the herb.
Absolutely. And that's so important to remember. That's part of the doing this over a long period of time is you have to differentiate because we have the plant in a medium of hot water. So especially when we're looking at energetics, right? The energetics of a tea of hot water is heat and moisture, and that's going to be there. And separating what you're feeling from the plant versus what is the water it's an important part of that. Also applies when you're using a tincture or a glyceride or an oil or anything like that. Yes, separating out that. Yeah, absolutely. This has two different mouth feels that I have. So I have some astringency, the classic astringency that we feel when the tissues are tightened in the mouth. And these aren't flavors. These are really flavors are what happens on the tongue with the taste receptors there. There's also the changes in the mouth that sometimes we talk about as flavors, but they're not truly flavors. So there's some astringency there. That astringent feel is the tightening of tannins in the mouth. And we do know that the plant is rich in tannins. And then it does have some saponins in it, which give it a different kind of feel in the mouth. So there's the tightness of the saponins, but there's also an astringent quality. There's the tightening from the tannins. There's also an astringent quality from saponins in this sort of instead of just tightening the tissues, it's like cleaning the tissues. It's removing the mucus lining and other stuff from the mouth. And so there's a feeling of tightness because of that removal, which is different and nuanced from the feeling of tightness from the addition of a tannin, if that makes sense. But it's an important distinction, and it's one that you can sort of feel here in that kind of cleaned feeling of the mouth. It doesn't necessarily feel like completely cleaned, and it doesn't necessarily feel healthy because that's not the optimal state of mucous membranes in the mouth. They shouldn't feel like that. So it can feel a little bit weird. But those soapy compounds in plants, abundant compounds in many plants, are able to kind of break up stuff and help to clear them out. And so that gives a different kind of astringency. So when we feel that kind of tightening of the tissues, we can ask ourselves, does it feel astringent tannicky, or does it feel astringent more saponiny? Yeah. So some of the important effects of Gotu Kola come out of this kind of this chemistry here. So it is primarily, we use Gotu Kola as, this is a term from the Ayurvedic tradition. And this is a plant from the Ayurvedic tradition. Ayurveda, Veda is life. Ayur means science. So this means the science of life. This is the herbal tradition, the healing tradition, really, in India and in that region and throughout the world. This is a major healing tradition in the world. And this is a plant that is highly revered in the Ayurvedic tradition and also in the Western tradition as it moves in here. And it is also a traditional plant in Chinese herbalism, but it comes from Ayurveda. And in Ayurveda, there is a term called rasayana. And a rasayana is a plant that is good for all different types of bodies. And this is important. We talk quite often about constitutional differences, right? The differences in all of our bodies, where some of our bodies tend to be hot and some of our bodies tend to be cold. Some of our bodies tend to hold a lot more moisture. Some of our bodies tend to be dried up. There's a lot of different ways that you can have a perfectly healthy body that just kind of varies. The same thing for minds. There's a lot of different types of minds, a lot of different types of brains. You can have a whole lot of different types of brains and have typically an absolutely typical type of brain. You can also have an atypical type of brain, but that's fine. A rasayana is a plant that is good for all bodies, and a medhya rasayana is a plant that is good for all different types of brains. So this is a medhya rasayana plant. This is a plant that is for all different types of things that affect the brain and the nervous system. This is a plant that is balancing and nourishing and regulating to the nervous system. So we use it for conditions of anxiety and depression, irritability, for grief, for ADD, ADHD, for a wide range of different types of brains out there. But we also use it for nourishing and strengthening the brain. This is a plant that is also what we call an adaptogen. We know this is a term from Western herbalism, right? So this is an Ayurvedic term. In Western herbalism, we use this term quite often for plants that help to regulate the information exchange between the brain and the endocrine system and the nervous system. And in that regulation of all of those parts of the body, we have the ability for the body to experience stress, experience things that are generally stress-inducing, and not have a full-blown stress response. Because a full-blown stress response on the body affects all of the different organs and systems in the body pretty profoundly. And so if we can increase our range of resilience when we're dealing with something that our body perceives as a stress, but we can increase our comfort zone where we are experiencing that stress, we can experience that stress, but not have the full immune suppression and inflammation and blood sugar dysregulation and vasoconstricting and blood clotting and digestion stopping and anxiety inducing and insomnia inducing, all of the different effects that stress has in our body. Right. And so that increase in range of resilience and the amount of stuff that we can deal with before our body goes into that stress response is something that adaptogens give to us. And so Gotu Kola is a plant that is an adaptogen. It's used for that long-term increase in our ability to deal with stress. And it is also we call a cephalic or a cerebral tonic. This is more of a Western term, sort of means the same thing. A cerebral tonic. So this is a plant that increases brain function. It improves clarity, focus, memory, learning. It is increasing the ability of the brain to process information at the same time as it's calming and relaxing the body in stress response. So this is a really lovely combination, since so often things that are considered to be cerebral tonics are generally stimulants. Right. So, one of the primary cerebral tonics, especially in our dominant culture, that we think of is coffee. Right. Because, and this is, I think, a really critical and important thing. Hey, Ren, You are so sweet. Um, what I love to think about when we're using plants like Gotu Kola is that issue of energy. The concept of energy is something we have really skewed ideas about in our culture because so often we have equated energy to coffee, right? How do we increase our energy? We want something that is going to be like coffee, something that's going to be like caffeine, something that's going to stimulate us. So we've narrowed our point of view as to what energy feels like to what coffee makes us feel like. And that is a really unhealthy and skewed way of interpreting energy. So one of the things that I like to think about with something like Gotu Kola, and when people come in asking for what's good for energy, is increasing, expanding the way that we think about energy or how energy feels in our body. Because if we go through and ask deeper questions as to what do you want when you say I want more energy, what does that feel like? What does that mean to you? Quite often what we'll say that it means is, well, I want more clarity of thought. I'm not able to think. I'm just kind of foggy. Like, okay, well, that isn't stimulating the nervous system and stimulating the adrenals. That actually negatively impacts our ability, that ability. So we could certainly use coffee, but we don't have to use coffee for that, right? We can focus something more on that. But we can also feel like, I feel warm. I feel increased circulation and flow. We can use other things for that too. We can use rosemary, we can use cinnamon, we can use ginger. So expanding the way that we think. This isn't a class on energy, so I'm not going to go into that too much. But I think that Gotu Kola is a really good plant for starting that conversation. If we're feeling like we want more energy, what does that feel like? And if it is something that feels like something that's going to increase memory and mental acuity, then this is a really great plant for that. So a cephalic, a cerebral tonic taken over a period of time, it's going to increase the ability of the brain. Thank you. The ability of the brain to process information. So this by itself is a great reason to use Gotu Kola for these qualities, the qualities on the brain and the nervous system, the long-term nourishing effect on there is wonderful. But there's a completely different side to Gotu Kola that makes it even better and really, really amazing. It is also, again, in the Ayurvedic tradition, this is one of the most important plants in dermatology for skin health in general, for the integumentary system. The integumentary system, the integument is the external covering of our body. So it's skin and hair and nails, and also all of the epithelial tissue that lines like the gastrointestinal tract, right? The mucous membranes of our mouth, all of those tissues make up the integumentary system. And Gotu Kola is also one of the best plants that we know of for helping with imbalances of the integumentary system. And that just means skin problems and hair problems. When we have skin that is not strong and healthy and resilient, when we have issues of wound healing or chronic skin disorders like eczema or psoriasis, or we have rashes, we have burns, bruises. So both acute and chronic skin problems, general weakness of skin, thinning of skin, tender, fragile, delicate skin. Gotu Kola is a plant that we can use because it is going to also improve long-term the health and the strength of the integumentary system. And the side effect of taking it for the integumentary system is you're also having this cephalic effect and an adaptogenic effect. Or if you're taking it for the cephalic adaptogenic effects, the side effect is you're going to be improving the health of your integumentary system. It is a really, really lovely plant for both of those. So we can use Gotu Kola taken internally as a tea. Drinking this regularly is going to improve the health of the skin. It's going to make the skin less responsive to inflammation. It's going to make the skin more resilient and healthy. It's going to improve cell proliferation and healing of the skin. But we can also use it infused into water and applied topically on the skin as compresses, taken in baths, infused into oil and applied topically to the skin. It is one of the best plants to use for wound healing and general skin health. and also infused into other types of oils for internal use. And this is what we're going to look at in the next couple of weeks, is we'll look at the different ways that we can work with Gotu Kola, both for the integumentary system and also for the cephalic system. So we'll look at some formulations with that. One of the things that we will be looking at next week, and I want to talk about it now because it's kind of a complex it's a complex medicine making process, but I think it's just fascinating, and I love using Gotu Kola for this. Again, from the Ayurvedic tradition, this is a process of making infused oils, of extracting herbs into oil. And there's a number of different oils that are used in Ayurvedic medicine for infusion. And in Ayurveda, there's so many different oils that are used, and they all have nuanced qualities to them, much more nuanced qualities than we generally give in Western herbalism. So I really love the tradition of use. However, with this method of infusion, I have some problems with some of the oils that are used, because this is a method of infusion that takes a lot of heat applied to it, and some other things that can cause oils to be really unstable and can cause them to be damaged. So you have to be very careful about the types of oils that you're using in this process. So what we're going to be doing in the next class, we'll be using sesame oil as a source of infusion, and we're going to make an Ayurvedic infused product that's used in a process called nasya. Nasya is an herbal oil application method, also coming from Ayurveda, where oil is dropped or applied into the nasal cavity, into the nasal tissue. And by applying the oil into the nasal tissue, we get transdermal absorption through the nasal mucosa right into the bloodstream, very rapidly and very completely. It's really thin tissue, and there's a huge amount of blood vessels, which is why we get nosebleeds so easily. But it is a very, very good way of getting stuff into the bloodstream, very similar to taking things sublingually, right? So we have quite often, we'll talk about putting like tinctures or things underneath the tongue, because underneath the tongue, we also see this rich network of blood vessels that can take up stuff. And when we do this, when we have this transdermal absorption through the tissues right into the blood vessels, wherever that is, we're bypassing the whole digestive process. We're going right past all of that. And that can be problematic if we're dealing with toxic stuff, and it can be really beneficial if we're wanting a very rapid route of absorption. Because when we take things in orally, if we're drinking it as a tea, it has to go through the digestion, and then it goes down into the intestinal tract, it comes into the bloodstream, it goes through the liver has to process it and clear out stuff, and then only then it's going to enter into the bloodstream, and then it's going to be available. That can take hours before it is experienced in the body. And so when we have this transdermal absorption, we are bypassing all of that, and we're going straight into the bloodstream. We do not have the liver protecting us against any potential toxins. We don't have the liver converting and activating certain things. And so sometimes we can't use, there's a number of plants that we cannot use this route of application for, but many of them we can. And Gotu Kola is one of them that is really commonly used in nasya for this same effect, for increasing mental alertness and mental clarity. It's used as a brain tonic applied as a nasal oil. With Ayurveda, when we're making these infused oils, one of the cool things about this process is they use a ratio, they use a combination of oil and water for extraction in the Ayurvedic tradition of oil. And by doing this, we have oil and water both extract completely different compounds. This is why we focus so much on different solvents for extraction of constituents from plants, because things that are oil soluble are generally not water soluble. Things that are water soluble are generally not oil soluble. Oil and water don't mix. And so when we're extracting chemistry from plants, we have to ask ourselves, what is that chemistry and which does it like better? Does it like oil or water? And sometimes you have plants like Gotu Kola that have widespread chemistry that likes both of them. And sometimes you have plants that really only like oil and they really don't like water, in which case this method isn't really for them. This is for plants with complex chemistry. So in this method, we take 1 ounce of herb and we add 4 ounces of oil and we add 8 ounces, I think that's what, right? 1, 4, 8 of water into a pot. All together, bring it to a boil. And so as the herb is in contact with the water is extracting water-soluble compounds. As it's exposed to oil, it's extracting oil-soluble compounds. They're both in the same pot, but they're all being extracted as it's going through this simmering, this low-grade simmering. And eventually what's going to happen is the water is going to evaporate. It's going to disperse because that's what water does when it's exposed to heat over a long period of time. And as that water decreases, we have a pot that has plant material in it, and we have oil and water. And as that water decreases, the volume is going to go down. It's going to continue to go down until we're left with a volume of 4 ounces, right? We started with 12 ounces of liquid. And once that 12 ounces reduces down to 4 ounces, we know that we've driven off all of the water. We know that there's no more water left in there. But the water did extract the water-soluble compounds. And here's the cool thing about this process. The water extracted the water-soluble compounds. You got this wide range of chemistry extracted from the plants. And then that solvent, that medium left. There's no more water left. So all of those water-soluble compounds are being held by the oil. They are still not technically oil soluble. There's a difference between solubility and being used as a carrier, right? This is the oil is now just a carrier, but it is still holding that complex chemistry. This is somewhat similar in Western herbalism. Nowadays, you're seeing a lot of use of what was a very traditional oil infusion method, and it's one that I teach to my students, of using an intermediary solvent. This comes from the National Formulary of the United States. This was the official way of making infused oils up until about 1947, was the use of a secondary solvent, a use of alcohol along with oil. So you treat the herbs with alcohol, and then you go in with oil. Alcohol has released some of those chemical constituents more than the oil would have, and then the oil is coming in, and now you have a wide range of chemical constituents. This is similar. It's just using water, which is an even better solvent for extraction of different compounds. You have to be careful when you're making something like this, because you do need to be careful anytime water is in with oil. So we're going to go through that process in the next class, looking at this oil infusion and talking about oil infusions of Gotu Kola. And how to use them, because they are very effective, not just for nausea, for application to the sinuses, for internal use for the brain, but also for application to the skin, using it for strengthening the skin, for nourishing the skin. It is really, really beneficial. So that will be the next class. We'll be looking at external use of Gotu Kola and making some infused oils from that. And then the final class will look at internal use. I do want to talk a little bit more about growing the plants. And if y'all want to take some of the plant home with you today, you certainly can. So again, this is what the plant looks like. I'll send these around to you folks. Can you pass these around to your family? And then you can take some. Oh, okay, take care. Yeah, do you want to take a little plant with you? Yeah.
Julie, what constituents?
Oh, we can plant our own?
There you go. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes.
What constituents are you going to get out of the tincture that you're not going to get out of the tea or the oil?
The tincture is going to give you very similar chemistry. The nice thing about Gotu Kola is that the chemistry of the oil and the tincture and the water infusion is actually the primary compounds are triterpenes, triterpene glycosides, which are the Asiaticosides. And there's a wide range of these, but they are pretty broadly soluble. They're present in tinctures, they're present in the waters, and they're also present in oil. There are alkaloids that are more water soluble. There are some volatile compounds, some volatile oils that are more oil soluble, or they would be more in the alcohol. But it is primarily the compounds of interest, the compounds that seem to be associated with primary chemistry are the Asiaticosides. And those are just present everywhere. So that's what makes it such a wonderful plant, is that it's so widely available. So the plant grows, you may see it. It is in areas that have enough moisture. You can see this as a pretty common weed. It is abundant along waterways in India. This is one of the primary areas that it's traditionally been grown in. And this is one of the cautions of buying Gotu Kola, is that one of the most common places for it to grow is along waterways in India. And in India, the waterways are notoriously unclean, problematic. And so if you're harvesting plants from along a polluted river, then you're going to have a plant that is going to have a lot of chemistry that you don't want, because this is a plant that's been taking up that chemistry from the waterways that it inhabits. So you really have to be careful about where you're sourcing your Gotu Kola from. I think it is in this plant, I think it is particularly important to buy it as an organically grown plant, because if it's organically grown, then it's been grown under cultivation, and the water sources that it has access to are water sources that are controlled and tested. Whereas if it's wildcrafted, it's likely taken from the sides of a river, and who knows who's been peeing upstream of that river, or whether there's been agricultural runoff onto that river. Very likely, if there's industry upstream from that river throwing waste products into the stream, very likely these are common things that are happening, other waste that enters into the waterways. It's unfortunate, but that is a real problem, sourcing plants from India. So yeah, don't get your herbs from there. But again, it is very, very easy to grow. It makes these tiny little flowers at the axils. And you can't see them, but they send out seeds. And so once you have it growing somewhere, you're going to see little tiny plants popping up. You see these little tiny, they're kind of kidney-shaped leaves with little scalloped edges. And the new leaves look just like this. So you're going to see these as tiny little leaves coming up. And then you're going to have just the plant growing and spreading. I have it in 4 or 5 different planters throughout my garden. And as you can see here, as it starts sending out these stems, where it has a node is where it sends out a leaf. Where it has a node, nodes have the ability to form root systems. Varying different plants are going to form roots more or less effectively at nodes, but all plants have the ability to form roots at nodes, and this is how we propagate plants quite often. Where the node, where you have the secondary stem coming out, you will often see roots starting to form there. And that's what this plant is doing. It's forming roots, anticipating that it's going to hit soil, anticipating that it's going to hit moisture. It's already forming roots in the aerial portion. And so as soon as it finds soil, as soon as it lays down in soil, those roots are going to be ready to go in and grab onto the soil and start to propagate. And so this is attached to the mother plant, right? So this would have come down, these roots are forming, and you can see it's even forming foliage in anticipation of having a plant. This is a tiny little plant right here, root system and foliage. So we could cut that off, and that would be one plant. Here's another one forming. We can see a tiny little rootlet right down at the base there. I don't know if you can see that. And then we have the foliage forming. This is why it's such a plant that spreads so very easily, because it spreads very easily. But it's also what makes it really easy to grow. So Yeah, grow Gotu Kola in your garden. It is said traditionally in Ayurveda that if you eat a leaf a day, this is going to increase your longevity and do all sorts of things that stories like that tell you are going to happen. But that is one of the traditions: is eat a leaf of Gotu Kola a day. And if you're growing it, it's very easy to do. Any questions about Gotu Kola? Then we will meet in the next couple of weeks. We'll go through and look at Gotu Kola for internal and external use. Next week, again, will be oil infusions for that. Thanks for joining us. That's it. I will see you all next week. Bye-bye. Bye, Ren. Thanks. Good to see you. Take care. Oh. There's a big old button that says end stream down at the bottom, and I don't know how I always miss it. It's the bane of my